Dorina Sackman-Ebuwa, Miss Dorito, soon to be Dr. Sackman-Ebuwa. Thank you so much for joining us on Highest Aspirations. This has been a long time coming, my friend.
Oh my gosh, what, 2018, right? Is that one? I have been calling you Steve Sassafras for so long,
You're
and
not the
everyone,
only one. Yeah.
I'm glad to know that that wasn't. I want to honor your name. How do you pronounce your last name?
Sophronis.
Okay, so now it's Steve Sophronis forever and ever. Finally, after seeing and meeting you at WIDA, saying, "Do you want to do a podcast?" And here we are, 2023. I am super stoked to have seen you now and doing this together with you, Steve Sophronis.
Good. And thank you for asking, by the way. That's like one of the first things I do with people. I asked you right before we started about how
Yes.
to pronounce your name. And it's so important. We actually did an episode, not to kind of get lost immediately in a conversation that doesn't have to do with one we're going to have, but we had a conversation, an interview about that, about the importance of names. And so thank you for asking. I think it is important.
Definitely. Great modeling of what we do for our profession, right?
Absolutely. All right. So I'm going to go. I gave you lots of different names. You go by all of them. I'm going to call you Dorina for the rest of this time. But I wanted to kind of mention all of those and let people know that you're going to finally finish that doctorate, which is really exciting. Okay. So let me just frame this conversation first by letting everyone know that Elevation has two major events every year. One is our Impact virtual sessions or week. It's a kind of a virtual conference where we have everything free. That's coming up. We're going to send that information out soon to everybody. And then we have this summit, which is a little bit more, we kind of bring people in. So it's smaller. It's really great, but we can't invite everybody. And so you're speaking at that. You're going to do a keynote and you're going to do a session. And what we really want to do is make sure that even though there's only 150-ish people coming to that we can put out the messages from our presenters and facilitators on the podcast and other places. So that's kind of what we're doing now with you. And one of the things that you're going to talk about at the end of the day, at our keynote, end of the day keynote, is this idea of sort of self-care. And educators and some of the things that are really happening, some of the things that aren't really happening, and how we can kind of approach that topic. So let me start by asking you to talk about some of the challenges that maybe you've faced as an advocate for multilingual learners in today's educational landscape, and how that concept of self-care has been misunderstood or misapplied in your experience, because that's kind of what we're really going to get into here, is what it really means.
It's great because there is a direct correlation between the advocacy and the difficulties and the challenges that you face as a multilingual learner advocate and educator. And then also the concept of self-care, which has definitely been exaggerated, commercialized, and to be quite honest with you, whitewashed. And so I think that that's where we have to really have that conversation because of the population of educators in the world of multilingual learners. We have to make sure that the beauty of the diversity of the multilingual learner is also represented in the term self-care, which I think, again, has been exaggerated. But in 26 years, there has been a roller coaster ride, right? There has been progression, regression in multilingual learning and advocacy. And you do see that, right? Sometimes you're on top, and then in the forefront are our students who are who speak English other than a language other than English as their heritage language. And you're just saying, this is great. And then all of a sudden you have students that, we're going to stop the bilingual program. We're not going to do dual language, or no, this is what you have to do. And this roller coaster ride in my career can really make somebody tired for
Yeah.
advocating, but you don't stop, right? And so it's really important that the big thing before I even say about what I faced is that every single multilingual learner, we know it's not just about English, but we really have to make sure that everybody understands that in order for you to truly be that multilingual learner, to be the advocate, you must be well-versed in policy.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not really teaching English to students who are coming from other countries. There is so much more that goes into it. And a lot of that responsibility is put on us, which is another problem.
Yep.
And that's the challenge that I did face often, which is principals saying, I defer to your expertise.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, the principal should also know who their students are in the school. The teachers, I don't know what to do with this kid. I don't speak Spanish. You're not supposed to. It's not a
Mhm.
bilingual, duolingual school. Therefore, roster equals responsibility. There are so many things that you come across, such as push in, pull out, getting bigger, stronger population. So where do I go? Well, there's only one of you, and there's only funding for one unit. Therefore, there's only one teacher. Can you travel from middle school to high school? You have teachers in small rural areas that are going to 4 different schools, and then you have one teacher per 32 children with no parapro. And so there's all these other things that you're saying, wait a second, why is this happening? This is inequitable,
Mhm.
right? And so how do we advocate? The first thing that you have to realize is you have to stop for yourself and say, I am getting burned out by this
Yep.
because the lack of equity that's happening, but also the true understanding of what my job is as a multilingual learner
Mhm.
educator. I need to have not just I got hired, here's the definition that's on the website of my school district. What is my job? What is my job? What is the role? And I think one of the first things to advocate for self is not about self-care. And this is the one thing about then that intersectionality between self-care and then also advocacy for multilingual is, in fact, it's not self-care, self-aware before self-care,
Mhm.
right? Self-reflect, self-respect, so there's no more self-neglect.
Yeah.
And I think that's the big thing of knowing what is my role? What am I doing? And then taking a step back and saying, let me have a conversation with you. This is a lot for one person to be doing. What do we have in this team that we can do? That's one thing that I really want to focus on, because the burnout comes from the compassion to do the job, the desire to be with the students, the love for the students, but then that gets exploited. I ask everybody, just Google exploitative empathy. It is not talked about in education field. It's mostly in the business field, but I'm ready to talk about it, where it's whether it's innocently ignorant or arrogantly ignorant,
Mhm.
that people feed off the empathy and compassion that teachers have to serve our community and our children, and I mean our, meaning all in our districts. And then all of a sudden, there's just so much on our plate. And then, well, then that's great. You can wear jeans on Friday.
Yeah.
Here's Taco Tuesday.
You
That
know,
don't work.
like you just framed that. I think it's such an interesting way. So let me just make a quick attempt to kind of take out a few things that I just took from that I've never really heard it framed that way before. I agree with everything that you said. The roller coaster ride that it is to be a teacher of multilingual learners in terms of policies changing. It's good, it's bad, it's good, it's bad. Distinct from being sort of a mainstream educator, however you want to put it. Different, for sure. The policy and understanding, like, that gives me a headache just thinking about I got to understand all the policy. When I came to Elevation, I had been a high school teacher for 17 years. I taught high school Spanish. Do you think I had any clue of how WIDA was different than ELPA or Florida at that time, which is now WIDA, or Texas or California, or let's not even mention New York, all of those places where I need to go to train. And every district has their own things. There's the policy. There's the deferment where you defer, I defer to you because you understand this. And then there's the jargon. I mean, that you mentioned. So there's just like a few points that make the role, the jobs that we're doing, or the people that are listening to this podcast are doing, um, so much different. And so you bring it back to that idea of self-awareness, which it seems, and this is the kind of the follow-up question that I have for you. It seems like you're saying that that's sort of skipped. Like we're not really reflecting, and we're not really being self-aware because we don't have time and we're not given the space to do it. Is that right? Is that kind of your point?
That's exactly right. And I think education in general, but because we are talking about our population of multilingual learner educators, and that is across the board, it's important that we focus specifically on this demographic, because our profession of multilingual education does differ from the mainstream in the sense of everything that you just said and what we were talking about, but also the responsibility that is placed upon us
Mm-hmm.
and the expected responsibility due to the fact that we, one, choose to be certified in ESOL, as it's still called, all the names, which is another thing for another
Yep.
time.
Yep.
Okay. So we'll use the term multilingual education. Since we're certified, since we chose this profession, because our choosing of this profession, we are then thrown into classrooms, and the lack of organization that often happens because people are not sure what to do. There are policies in place and there are things that districts do beautifully.
Hmm.
And we should find those districts, and those districts should be models for us so that we can see what is working and what is not. And then basically, as just like we differentiated instruction, we have to differentiate what works for our own
Sure.
districts and our own schools. But what I am seeing most across the country, again, is this deficit based ideology, this eye roll, right? And this whole thing of, oh, when I have that little globe on my roster and I'm a content area teacher, oh, I got
Yeah.
5 globes. Well, as Sarah Saeed has taught me about JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, a JEDI doesn't roll their eye, they ask why. Let me say that again. A Jedi who truly believes, as a multilingual educator, in justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, they don't roll their eye, they ask why. So a content area teacher needs to do that too, because you are a
Hmm.
multilingual learner
Hmm.
teacher then. And so
So
when you see that child, you've got to say, ugh, no, don't roll your eye. Ask, why am I rolling my eye? Oh, it's because I don't know what to do. Well, then I need to, because roster equals responsibility, I need to find the right resources and help and reach out and be vulnerable to make sure that I know how to work with the students.
right, which brings us back to that awareness, and you're bringing up some really good points, and this is like real talk, which I knew we'd have. Like, people avoid talking about that eye roll that happens all the time, and like I have this conversation internally with my colleagues. I have this conversation with my friends, many of them who are still in the classroom now. And it's the reality of this situation. Let me back up before we get into like sort of some possible solutions. You talked about like um, figuring out how some schools are doing it and then kind of replicating those models. But the question, like, where you mentioned one of the examples that you had was rural areas where this kind of comes out. But like, how does this how does it lead to, like, where is this particularly impactful, I guess, is my question. This whole idea, this misinterpretation of self-care that
Okay.
leads to burnout and compassion fatigue and all this. Have you seen that happen in specific places? Like, who's in danger of it? How can you know, if you're listening, that okay, this is going to be a problem, we need to get ahead of it?
That is a great question. And I think the reason I said rural and the reason I say models is because, again, there are some people that are doing fantastic work, and I want people to
Hmm.
realize that. And I always want to go through the lens of appreciative inquiry and the things that are working well. But I think we do have to have this real talk. And I'm so glad that this is the opportunity and platform for you, Steve, and myself to have the real talk of people listening when they do have that burnout, vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, because we are with the students that have a lot of trauma. I
Yeah.
am not dismissing anybody else's, but what I'm saying is, again, we're focusing on our population here. And what happens is, when it comes to that self care, the misconception of what it is, take care of yourself. Make sure that you're over the weekend, you rest and do something you like. Little things like, I'm going to, and there's the difference, that's called avoidance. I don't want to deal with my students right now. I'm really overwhelmed. Let me go get a manicure. I'm going to go fishing right now. I don't want to talk about school right now. All of that is called avoidance. And there is a difference between avoidance and then the self aware for self care. Self care is not being selfish. Self care is not being self indulgent. What self care is the boundary created so that the two can happen. I can take care of myself and I can also balance taking care of others. But if I can't do that because I've been overly taking care of
Hmm.
my students, I need to step back for a minute. And so, where is this happening most? High population of English learners, high population of students with interrupted education, which I hope that name changes someday because we
Yeah.
want asset based, right? We're calling them multilingual learners, but we still have SLIFE and SIFE. I
And
hope that we
long-term English learners is so many. Definitely. Yep.
well, exactly, Steve. So when you're having an influx of a couple of challenges of a specific subgroup, so let's say multilingual learners. Now we have a school district that has a school that has a high population of interrupted education, where the responsibility is then to put on the multilingual learner educator to ensure, as well as that content area teacher who has the teen kids in the classroom with interrupted education.
Mhm.
An influx due to the historically what is happening in the news, and we're having refugees, natural disaster, political asylum. Students are coming in, and now we also have the culturally responsive aspect of things as well, where we have to understand that we're bringing students into an American school system where people might not agree with the ideologies and why the students are there in the first place. Now, our job as multilingual educators is to make the students feel safe and to ensure the environment itself has people where their lens of life, they have the ability to take that lens off and see the innocent child that has nothing to do with the politics. It is a child. All of this is exhausting.
Yeah,
I'm
not
exhausted
easy.
talking about it.
Yep. And we don't even talk about it.
No, we don't. No, we don't. And that's why I think it's hard for me to just place one thing of where I'm seeing it.
Yeah, sure.
Because you can have 4 English learners in a district and say it's smaller, but that person unfortunately is innocently ignorant to what to do.
Mhm.
That can be very tiring. And then again, that's the I defer to your expertise. You have the certification.
Yeah.
That's one way of pressure where it's like, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed. But really, a lot of it is a very large population that I'm seeing in, which I can't stand the term, at-risk schools, which I
Mhm.
call at promise. I can't stand the word at risk in Title I. But there seems to be a higher population, Title I EL population, multilingual learner population. And then when you see that, and there's so much that's asked of you, to ensure that you have the influx of students, and then you have a new curriculum, and then you don't have a curriculum, and then here's I'm going to throw you $15,000 because we have this money to spend by
Yeah.
September 30th.
But spend it right
Go
away.
buy something. Right now you have teachers literally jumping on forums on Facebook going, I got 5,000 to spend, I got 50,000. That's
Mhm.
not right. Where is that? That's not equitable. Where are we using those funding correctly, and what are we doing to educate ourselves? We need time, we need teams, we need organization, not just go do it because I got
Yeah.
to work out my scope and sequence in mathematics right now so that they can do well on this test.
Right. Right.
Keeping it
Oh
real.
man. So like there's so much there, and I think what we've done I think a really good job of is sort of framing the problem in a way that, again, I really haven't heard it framed like this before, which is good, because now I want to get into what you look at. I'm going to let you say what you need to say, but it appears that you look at this transformative emotional intelligence, or TEI, as part of the possible solution here. So how can that transformative emotional intelligence, and I am totally
Finish
ignorant to
this
that, by the way.
doctorate.
I
What's
am
that?
not, I am totally ignorant to that. I am not, like, I don't know much about it at all. I
Mhm.
didn't do a tremendous amount of research on it, so I'm being vulnerable here and letting you know that. How can that help educators in managing, understanding, regulating, and balancing their emotions, particularly in the context of everything we're talked about? Advocating for underserved students means everything that you just described, right? It's not just having, it's all of the stuff that builds up when you're doing that. So love you to provide some insights into the kind of practical application of that. And you talk about the 4 pillars and 13 skills of TI. These are all things that I know a little bit about, but I'd love to learn more about. And I'm sure others would as well, as part of the kind of solution.
Well, I appreciate this so much because I do believe that that's the first step in doing this research on emotional intelligence, which my doctorate is on that, as well as doing this years before. It's important to know that in the actual teacher pre-certification programs and in people who want to become multilingual learner educators in general, there is a lot in a course perhaps, or embedded, of self-care,
Mm-hmm.
embedded of the importance, and embedded social emotional learning, unless it's not allowed in certain states, which you know that I'm from one. But it's important for people to know that that is not what emotional intelligence is. Normally they're talking about SEL for the student.
Uh-huh.
But why would we learn in a pre-service or professional development about SEL when we're burnt out, when we have compassion fatigue, when we have vicarious
Tell me, can
trauma?
we stop for one second? And tell me what do you mean by compassion fatigue? Because I think there's probably
Compassion,
people listening saying, what does that mean?
that's a great question. Compassion fatigue, and the best way for me to explain this is when, let's just say you're working with students and you are truly empathetic and compassionate towards your students because of the situations at home, food insecurity, the just coming to a new country and trying to learn, having interrupted education, just being a kid,
Mm-hmm.
right? and all of the difficulties on top of coming under political asylum, natural disaster, war-torn countries, situations, and just wanting to be you or your self-identity. And you then love this child so much, like you know you do as a multilingual educator, and then you take that information and you take on the stress of that child, and you love them so much, but you're exhausted because then you go home and you start thinking about them. What else could I do? Let me bring them a plate of pasta. How else can I do this? What lesson can I do? Let me go look at this podcast. Let me go do this. And you're constantly, even at the time that you're supposed to get downtime, you're constantly thinking of your kids,
Yeah.
that it also impacts you even
Yep.
talking to your own children.
Yep.
That is
Been there.
compassion. You've been there?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know many teachers who haven't,
Exactly. Because we're there to serve, Steve. We're there to serve, and we're there to serve our children, and we know it. But those who are servants, nurses, firefighters, policemen, EMTs, all of us in the military and teachers, we serve. To teach is to serve is to lead. To lead is to give every child what you need. We are exhausting our resources from within and our energy as those who serve our community, other than that of a, with all due respect, Wall Street or a lawyer. And I'm not knocking their profession. I'm saying we chose service.
Mm-hmm.
Why? And why am I saying this? Because there's two types of emotional intelligence. Daniel Goleman's work back in 1995, okay, great stuff, but it's about business. It's about creating a good business environment of the soft skills of emotional intelligence to create a great corporation for businessmen. Well, then Salovey and Mayer, that's where a lot of the research is, back in 1964. But then two men, Dr. Darwin and Dr. Gary Lowe, in the 70s decided, after seeing Salovey and Mayer's work, and they were psychology teachers at Texas A&M, Corpus Christi, and they just kept on going and thinking, and they're like, wow, emotional intelligence is needed for those who serve. It's very different than that for those who go into other fields. Let's think about this. The students who are ready to go into psychology and nursing and everything, we've got to get that emotional intelligence in those people. And that's the work I'm addicted to.
Gotcha.
Because it is about us. It's for us, by us. And I think that that's what's important, that we have teachers of teachers. So once I saw that research, I realized then transformative emotional intelligence then works for the people who serve, so that it can help you in and out of the classroom to think constructively and behave wisely, to have reflective thought, to actually balance the cognitive and the emotional mind. And those are the things that emotional intelligence can do for us, to be able to create the boundaries, to stand up for ourselves and advocate without hindering hindering the education of students, or putting ourselves in jeopardy for our own jobs, because advocacy sometimes is a fearful thing because of ramifications in our profession, where we are very often micromanaged. So people are silenced a lot of times, or they don't want to speak, or they don't know. But with a teacher shortage, now's our time to start knowing how to speak. And that's the difference. It's not about your feelings and how you feel about things. It's the cognitive feelings drive the change of the fact that that's right here. You've got to know what to do. So my feelings are this, but now what is the research I need to do in order to make that change?
Right. So I'm going to go back to your example about, you said a manicure and fishing, neither of which would be my chosen sort of, I have a million hobbies, as my wife will tell you, probably annoyingly so. And I'm probably one of those people who, particularly when I was teaching, but even now, I sort of escape to those hobbies. I find a way to get myself into a flow state, which I do fairly easily because I have passions in life. If I have a really stressful day and I'm in one of those flow states, maybe I'm playing music, maybe I'm surfing or snowboarding, am I neglecting the feelings that I need to deal with by doing that? Is that avoidance? And if so, what is it that I need to do? I'm asking you basically to kind of give this some life, give it like some texture. What does it look like to me? And the example I gave is like, I feel like that was what I was doing. It's like avoidance. I don't even think about this stuff right now. I'm gonna do something totally different. And do I come back and feel better after I'm done doing those things? 100%. Does it last very long? No, no, not at all. I need to like more of it. It's like a drug, right? So I don't know if I'm framing this question right, but what does it look like to you? Like what can I do differently in this, in everything that you're talking about to sustain that feeling, to sustain the caring that I have for my students, but also make sure that I'm not burning out.
I love it. Okay, so you gave a perfect example, and I love that you use flow because that is the one book. Mihai just sent Mihai's book that I would love to recommend to everybody about flow and optimal experience, because your respite and the things that you do, let's just say music, are what is keeping you afloat, right? Now you give a perfect example. So let's go back. Let's say you're a teacher, you're working with multilingual learners, you had a really rough day. And because the kids often come to you, because they feel safer, the oxytocin levels of students get higher because they come to you. And so they skip math class because Mr. Collins in math class just in a corner, right? And with all due respect, but he does not have the right sources or time. And so the kids just kind of act out, or they'll go to the bathroom and then they'll come visit you.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're dealing with a lot of all these other issues. It's a Calgon take me away moment. Youngins, you have to Google that, know that idea. But when you're sitting there going, oh my gosh, I had to work with Mr. Collins and then the principals and then the kids. And then how do I tell the kids? But then I don't. And then you have that pobrecita syndrome and you don't know exactly what to do. Oh my gosh, I just got to get home and let me just go play music.
Yep.
No. What you should do is say, okay, I am feeling doo about diri because da. Okay, that's the sentence frame that I say and write out to myself all the time. The doo, the diri, da da, you got to fill out. I am feeling doo about diri because da. You actually have to write this down. Neuroscience has said, obviously, writing it down, preferably a journal of pen to paper, but if not, you can do it technology, not just to yourself in your head.
Mm-hmm.
I am feeling doo about diri because da. Now you've acknowledged what's wrong with you. Now the power of however, now you say, however, I am feeling overwhelmed by the amount of students that are skipping Mr. Collins's class because they just don't feel validated in his class. And now they're coming to me. And now I'm being in trouble by the principal because the kids are knocking on my door and cutting class. Okay. However, okay, I realize the kids feel safe with me. And I already know the sentence frames I'm going to use to talk to the principal and also help Mr. Collins find the right resources so that we can, like diffit.com or diffit.org, to differentiate, right? AI, different ways, or model for him. So I'm putting a solution or a possible solution of the however, or however, I just feel great that the kids feel that comfortable with me. I'll work on this. Now, what I did is I acknowledged what the stress factor was of my day as a multilingual teacher. Then I put a however, I ended on a high note and said, this is what I'm probably going to do. Now that I've recognized that, how do I feel? Well, I still have more to write. Then you write again how you're feeling until those feelings go away to the point where, whew, they're here, but they go away in the sense of, I got it out in the universe. There it is. Now I'm going to go play my music. Because now what will happen is that you're going to revisit that journal and say to yourself, okay, I have possible solutions. Now I'm going to go back and write that email or have that conversation in my PLCs with, I am concerned. Be a concerner, not a complainer. Because what will happen is Steve, if he's overwhelmed by what just happened in his class, and then he goes and plays music, the next day he's going to come back. It's still going to be there.
Yeah.
And there was no possible solution. You're going to start complaining over being concerned.
Yeah.
And the last thing we want in our profession is for someone to think that we're a complainer, because we're
100%.
So the sentence frame of, I am concerned about diddy because of dida. Some possible solutions are, well, guess what? You already tried to do some solutions in your however.
Right.
That becomes this entire pattern of recognizing what's wrong, honoring your expertise, truly finding some solutions, and then also giving that balance of finding that respite, the music, the golf, the manicure, the bath. And then you can actually do it without avoidance.
Woo, I feel like I'm in a therapy session right now, not in a bad way. I love it. I mean, it's great. You know, we're zooming way out here, but it's so important to zoom out like this. And you know what I was thinking is, as you were talking, I'm like, yeah, and that also the music I play would probably be a lot happier than the angry music I would be creating because I had pent up stuff going on. Which there's a time and a place for that music as well, but we can save that for another time. So I love it. I mean, that frame that you use is so great. It doesn't take a tremendous amount of time. I imagine it's something, it sounds like for you, it's become kind of a muscle memory thing. Like, you know, to do it. And like any routine, it's probably something that you need to build over time. Um,
21 days.
21
21
days.
days.
Tell me more.
If you do that for 21 days, due to neuroscience and research with neuroplasticity, you can reprogram your brain for more positivity. If you, and I cannot stress to you enough, this is coming from someone who is, not to perpetuate any stereotypes, but I am born and raised New Yorker. I am cynical. I came out of the womb sarcastic, and I came out of the womb cynical.
It all
If it is
serves you well.
exactly. But if it is a beautiful day, I'll just say, wait a second, it's going to rain in 2 minutes. Like, I will always be that person. So I am, and I'm someone who suffers from anxiety very badly. And so, with a very emotional person who kind of is over the chart empathy, which you have to reel your empathy in as a multilingual learner, by the way, it is unhealthy to have too much empathy. And that is another reason for burnout for multilingual learners. If our empathy is too much, our assertion is too little. It becomes aggression then. So again, with emotional intelligence, there are 13 major skills, and understanding your empathy is a very, very important thing for a personal skill. And my empathy was off the charts to the point where I was feeling bad and getting emotional and crying and having a lot of anxiety, which I already did. I was diagnosed a long time ago. Why I needed to mention that is because this is the stuff that can really add to the burnout. And when you truly have this conversation with yourself, and this is also why I'm researching neuroscience, I'll do a second doctorate in neuroscience. And yeah, I'm obsessed with the brain and understanding, especially the bilingual brain. And Arturo Hernandez does wonderful work out of University of Houston, Texas, about bilingual education and bilingual brains. The beauty of the neuroscience is that if you practice something for 21 days, it can actually transform you into thinking more positively. Before you even know it, that sentence frame will become part of you. That is where you take that sentence frame, which I do, and I have it on a 5x7 index card, and then I actually laminate them. And instead of my students who get into arguments with each other or even fights, I don't do the pink slip to the principal. I have them fill that
Yeah,
out, even in
I was
their
just gonna
heritage
say, yeah.
language. Now I've modeled social emotional learning. Why? Because I'm in touch with my own emotional
Right.
intelligence. And the skill I use there can now be embedded into the way that I teach, creating an incredibly healthy, safe environment for students.
You know, and that's a really, really great point. And it kind of leads me to my next question. You're talking about doing something for yourself that is first really for yourself, and to allow yourself to decompress and to be healthy about the stress that you have. But then you're modeling it for students, which is obviously a huge win, whether you call it social emotional learning or whatever you call it, wherever you are doing something that is definitely largely positive. You're setting an example as a role model, which is great. So my question is, like, everything you're talking about is about yourself as an educator and now the students who you serve. So that's kind of like a bottom up approach. But what is missing at the school level, at the district level? What needs to happen there? Are there improvements or changes that you think are needed to better support educators who are working in similar contexts? What if an educator has never heard you talk about the sentence frame that you just did? They don't know to do that. They don't have the time, the support. Is this something that is not just bottom up, but is top down as well? Is it happening? What needs to happen?
In a perfect world, and I absolutely love your question, and I applaud you so much for such a deep question and an important question, and for this podcast. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to talk about it because it's something that I get very emotional about. So bear with me if I start to fill up a little bit. But
I'll be right behind you probably, so we'll both be.
I feel so deeply for this profession. It is the greatest profession on the planet. Look, this is where the Gen X applause comes out. I get all like emotional too much, but I love this profession so much. I love the students. This is where empathy I have to reel in, right? I have to self-regulate my emotions. I have a tendency to do that. I'm getting emotional because I'm extremely passionate about it. But the reason I'm saying this is because we do not see it enough. In the research that I have been doing, there is zero, zero emotional intelligence professional development for teachers in the United States. Arizona did something really good, but it is on your own. And when I say zero, you can do specific professional development that has SEL for educators. But what I'm talking about is transformative emotional intelligence that helps you in and out of the classroom to help with burnout, because I believe it's called burn in. Okay. So you have to do it from within. It's the intrinsic motivation to want to do this. But again, we are dealing with flames, not embers. And everyone expects teachers to teach with their hair on fire. No, embers is what's keep you warm. Flames are just pretty. It's the embers that stay longer and keep you
Mm-hmm.
warmer. We need to be the ember teacher, not the flame teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you do that, it's from within. There is very little. Again, the word zero is hard because I'm hoping to be wrong, right? If somebody's listening to this and they have something in their district, there should be a unit of pay in budgets for districts for schools to have counselors. Those counselors are ready for the teachers. There should be professional development, self-paced professional development on self-awareness through emotional intelligence, but not, we have to do a required PD, let's check
Mm-hmm.
the
Yep. Yep.
box.
Yep.
This is for you, a professional development that's offered for you, that you will be self-paced and get your professional development points. You meet once a month after if you want to, for a group where you would do this understanding of self-awareness, self-aware, self-care, self-reflect, not neglect, and then understand emotional intelligence. You work on the 4 pillars. There's 4 actual quarters most of the time in school. There's 4 pillars of emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
For 1 year, you work on each of them. These are ideas or things that happen from the top. Again, I'm getting a little deeper with the idea, but we don't have that. We don't have counseling on hand. We don't have really good, solid soulmate partners or accountability partners that are there. Every single school should have accountability partners, a person, not just your confidant in your PLC, but someone who really is that person where there is that moment of vulnerability where you do
Mm-hmm.
need that person.
Yeah.
Everyone should have that. And
And some people, just real quick, and then I want to continue. Some people find that like organically. They're lucky enough to find that. I did when I was 22 and started teaching when an older teacher. If I hadn't found that, forget it. Forget. There's no way I would have lasted more than a year and a half. No way.
And
Sorry to
that is
interrupt.
that was not an interruption. That was a perfect addition to what you're saying, because I know there are people listening going, I already have that, like you at 22. There are people going, I don't feel this way. This is what I'm seeing, and this is what the majority is seeing, because we wouldn't have a teacher shortage if we didn't.
Well, that's the other thing. Like everything that you're saying makes so much sense, and you would think that districts would be invested in this, right? That we as a society would be invested in this because it will mitigate, if not completely disrupt, that whole teacher shortage that we're dealing with right now. It would certainly help. I mean, it might not be the magic bullet, but
Right. And what I have been seeing, and there's a school that I serve in South Carolina. I absolutely love every single teacher, and I absolutely adore the principal. In my heart of hearts, I believe that they would like to close that school and open up a charter.
mm-hmm.
So we have to have this conversation about policy, politics, people, constituents, voting, all of it. You are part of the community. And I know I just said something that's really going to ruffle some feathers. We need to, in order for us to have a seat at the table. What's happening is this gorgeous thing called public education is being looked at under a microscope in a very different way. And we have to see that perhaps sometimes people are trying to say, well, if it doesn't work, we have to go another angle. Should we privatize? Should we not? We all know that that conversation is out there. So the more that they have the challenges, that is, in my opinion, and there are articles out there, there's research out there, there's peer reviews, and I can give references. But also from doing the research, you have to see that some of the reasons why I believe we are not getting the support and not getting the funding is for other reasons. There is an obvious thing. We're having a shortage of bilingual teachers. Article just yesterday. We're having a shortage of teachers. Teachers are leaving in droves.
Hmm.
Teachers are deciding to actually just go to teach for 3 years. And then all of a sudden they're on TikTok or they're doing Teachers Pay Teachers to supplement or doing things. I don't blame them
Yeah.
because of what's happening with pay. And I
Yep.
used to poo on it. I don't do it anymore. Good for you. More power to you until you get the respect that you deserve.
Yep.
Why is that happening? There's a bigger picture going on, and that's why it starts with culturally sustained pedagogy. And it starts with understanding what we have to do for the profession. But now I'm going to get back to multilingual teachers first, because that was a big umbrella, and I said
Sure.
what I said.
Yep.
Why I
Bring it.
said culturally sustainable teaching is this. We are dealing with children who are coming from other countries. We are dealing with people who are arrogantly ignorant to that or innocently ignorant. Majority of the time, when you do not see the support, it's the arrogance of ignorance because their lens of life, they don't want the immigrant child in the classroom. It's just a new, oh my gosh, this is driving me crazy. That all of those different things, that's where the training has to happen of one's own lens of life. There is a direct correlation of culturally relevant teaching and emotional intelligence. Your self-awareness of how you see the children
Hmm.
and what your biases are, you have to be aware of that in those 13
Yep.
pillars.
Yeah.
I mean,
So the idea of implicit bias is embedded in all of this.
without question.
Yep. Yeah, we
Without
talked
question.
about that before. Another thing that I feel like we talk about a lot, but we don't do a whole lot to really really get into. And interestingly, to your point about this stuff kind of happening at in business, I mean, Elevation's an educational technology company. I'd like to say that we're education before technology, so we're a little different in that way, but we do a lot of that work here. And a lot of the work that we do here, I'm like, why weren't we doing that when I was teaching, where it was even more important to do?
Meaning what? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, the idea, everything that we're talking about, this idea of self-care, of mental health, implicit bias is a huge component of it. I mean, we have, erg groups, everything, all of this stuff is happening that allows us to really look in the mirror, or forces us to look in the mirror and acknowledge our implicit bias so that we can work with our colleagues and our partners in school districts, at least unveiling a few layers of the bias that we all carry with us. But it seems like, at least in my experience, I've been in the classroom in 8 years, so I'm wide open with that. I don't want to pretend like I was just there yesterday. But I live with a teacher, with my wife, and I know many of them, and that does not seem to be happening in the way that it could. And I think it goes with everything that you're saying right now.
Right. And I think by lens of life training, that's what I call it,
I like
because
that.
yeah, lens of life training, of taking your lens and seeing your pillars. How do you see the world? And how that impacts how you see the multilingual child in your classroom.
Hmm.
It is directly related to the empathy, compassion, understanding, awareness, time management, commitment ethic, assertion, decision making, everything that you do. Those are all the skills of emotional intelligence. But I have to say, when it comes to also that, we're also dealing with self-care. And I, in the beginning of this podcast, discussed whitewashing. Self-care has become this amazing commercialization, the word self-care and all of that. If we really look at honestly with the self-care, the self-aware, the self-respect, the emotional intelligence, we also have to look at something of, historically speaking, self-care has not really been something that is discussed with other communities.
Hmm.
And that's why it's important. Our African American communities, our South Asian communities, Latinx communities, or Latino, Latina, how you wish to say. And that's why you want to look up radical self-care. And a lot of people don't talk about that. And that's one of my most fascinating things to discuss, because radical self-care happened in the 60s when it was dealing with advocacy and the importance of what radical self-care is. And really what it is the prioritizing of yourself in order for you to advocate.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that conversation, if there's one thing you want to Google, radical self-care for our African-American multilingual learner educators, and see that there is a difference. And we must, culturally speaking,
Exactly.
understand that self-care in itself is a cultural thing.
Right.
And what my self-care is might be very different than my BFF Monica Washington, where her self-care might be very, very different than mine. But we can have conversations about it and understand why it's different because of exactly what you just said.
Yeah. Oof. All right. Boy,
There's a
I
lot.
feel like
There's a lot.
we're gonna need to come back together and really dive in a little more to this. But for now, as we kind of wind this down, I want to ask, this is not the question I was going to ask you at the end, but I think this is the right question to ask you now, is there are people listening to this and they're overwhelmed and they have a lot going on, and maybe they, like I did, wrote the sentence frame that you put down. Hopefully they do something with it. What is your recommendation? You're listening to this now. What is the first step? What do you do as an individual? That's the only thing that most people who are listening to this right now, like me, have control over, like what they do themselves. What's the first step here to kind of move forward with this work?
The first step to move forward with this work, there's so much I wish to say. And I know we only have a little time, so I hope we do meet again. The first step is important, is the first pillar of emotional intelligence, which is your self-esteem. I want anyone listening to really look inside themselves and ask themselves how they feel about themselves. Have that inner dialogue within yourself and see how you're feeling. I'm not talking about aesthetically, how beautiful you look, how handsome you look, how wonderful you look. That is a wonderful thing. I'm talking about, for example, just to come here, I lost my makeup bag and I wanted to look so good with my makeup. My lack of self-regulation for myself and how I completely did something called an EFF, an enemy friend forever. It's that person on the shoulder that beat the living you know what out of me for not being able to find my makeup bag in time for this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so I just beat myself up that before I got here, I had to use the sentence frame of I am feeling, because I felt so defeated how I beat myself up. That means I have a lower self-esteem than I think I do. And I am working on my self-esteem every day. And the reason I say that is because research, the higher the self-esteem, the higher the management of stress and anxiety, the higher the management of your own emotional intelligence. There is a higher emotional intelligence to those with higher self-esteem. So the first thing is to truly see how much you do love yourself. That self-love, it's not self-care. We have to do self-aware, then see how much self-respect you have. I every day have to work on my self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
Every day. When you see that, then you will realize that that self-esteem, that conversation with yourself, directly impacts your time management, commitment ethic, personal drive, all of it. It's very, very fascinating, because then it also impacts your ability to be assertive, over aggressive, your ability to be a decision maker. Are you overly empathetic to the point where you're just like, oh, I love this kid so much, he can just pass my class, I'll just give him a
Mm-hmm.
C, which is
There's a lot of
pobrecito.
that. Yep. Yep.
And that I can't stand. That's the TLC squared. You got to give them tough love culture and tender loving care. So you do for yourself. You must give yourself tender loving care, but also that tough love culture, TLC squared. When you look at yourself from your self-esteem level, that's when you can say, I'm feeling defeated. I don't know if I'm good enough. I don't have all that. You are an expert in your field if you've been teaching more than 10 years. You have the right, according to the Pew Institute of Research, 10 years of doing something, you have the right to say that you're an expert in the
Mm-hmm.
field, yet you can still doubt yourself.
Oh yeah, all the time.
And if you're under that, you're an emerging leader in the field, and you should remember that you are. But why I want you to start with your self-esteem first is because that is a direct relation to the other pillars of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And how you enter your classroom about how you feel about yourself. And if there's a lot going on, it's not check it out the door. It's to allow yourself the vulnerability through that frame, but really recognizing, wow, I have to work on how I truly feel about myself. And the one thing I want to say about that real quick is also the vulnerability. Let's just say you're going through a lot. Okay. And I know there's people out there listening right now that you might be going through a lot. It's breast cancer awareness. My sister is a survivor. A friend of mine is in surgery on Monday. I go to surgery on Wednesday. We all have to take care of ourselves. There's a lot going on in the Gaza Strip that breaks my heart. And there's so much. You see how I have to regulate my emotions?
Mm-hmm.
I have to check myself a little bit. But right now, if I were to teach a class and I'm this emotional, one of the things that I do is actually what I learned from a vet. If you've ever been in a vet and you see a candle lit, it's one of the illuminated candles, not the ones you burn with a flame. And it says it's the code of please be quiet, please be respectful, please be understanding. Someone's pet is going to the Rainbow Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
I took that and decided to use that in my classroom. On the days that I'm the most vulnerable, my self-esteem is a little bit down. I'm being honest with myself. I used my sentence frame. I'm overwhelmed with what's happening in the world, myself, my life, and my job as a multilingual teacher. I'm going to tell my students early on, when that flame is on and you see it in my classroom, that's my own honest vulnerability. Please be nice today.
Hmm.
Please understand. It has been one of the most impactful things in my career that when students see that the flame is on, and then often by the end of that period, I will say, Rockinson, can you do me a favor? Can you take that and turn the flame off for me?
Yeah, yeah,
Did we do
yeah.
it, miss? Did we? I said, you fuel me, honey. You fuel my fire. You make my embers burn well. And then when they turn that illumination candle off, they realize that Miss Sackman, Miss Dorito is feeling better. These are the wonderful ways where we can show vulnerability, but we've got to be self-aware before that self-care.
Yeah. Wow. What a beautiful anecdote. And I think it's, I mean, just such a great way to do that in a subtle yet very um obvious way. And you're teaching your students that that's allowed, and not only that it's allowed, but that it's encouraged, and that they're a part. You know what it is? It's just basic humanity, bringing it back in to a room where sometimes I think, especially newer teachers, and I certainly did this myself, we try to be someone we're not, because we're supposed to put on a show and we're supposed to be this person who we saw when we were students, even if it wasn't necessarily the right way. And it takes a long time to break those barriers down. And if you're not intentional about it, or if you don't have the support, or if you haven't listened to something like this, it takes a long time to do that. So you gave us, I think, that last example is a beautiful one, but you gave us a lot of little things, I think, that we can do to get started. And we're gonna finish this conversation, or I definitely have a part two at some point.
I think so.
Um,
I would love it.
and we'll see each other soon next month at the in Boston at the summit. But we'll have to do something else and continue this, because there's so much more to be said. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, because I try not to make these things too much over an hour long. So I want to, where can people go to learn more about the work you do? By the way, it's not just this. There's a lot of other work that you're doing. And I chose this because I thought it was an inspirational thing to do in a podcast, rather than something that you'd need kind of handouts for and everything else. So anyway, where can people go to learn more about the work you're doing?
I think if you go to YouTube, I have something called Believe Cafe, and I'm revamping it now. It was prior to the pandemic, and if you go to Believe_Cafe with Miss Dorito, there are 42 sessions on how to build your emotional intelligence. It'll be turned into a book in June. Yay!
Exciting.
But yeah, but with my executive functioning, it'll probably be next June, you know, in 2025, but I digress. That is one place. Also, there's a few webinars out there on transformative emotional intelligence with Miss Dorito. Again, it's just Google if you just want that. Go to dorinasackman.com. That's where a lot of them are. If you have to, I'm very uncomfortable. See, this is where I have to work on my self-esteem and my assertion. Let me backtrack with my emotional intelligence skills and not feel guilty about saying where you can find this
Yeah.
information.
Yeah.
Let me backtrack. Ready? Here we go. I'm going to try, friends. I'm modeling. You can find this information on dorinasackman.com, as well as the fact that I have a YouTube channel called Believe Cafe, 42 sessions that are made for teachers, by a teacher, to build your emotional intelligence and get started on emotional intelligence. And I'll be very excited to any time that you wanted to reach out to discuss more about emotional intelligence, because it is a massive passion of mine. And one of the big parts are the sentence frames on how we frame our thoughts to build the boundaries and create that empowering conversation and the difficult conversations that we can have with our administration as we advocate for our students. How did I do? Was that
Great
good?
job. You did great. You did great. I think I like the other version of you a little bit better, but that's okay. That one worked too. Probably because I suffer from a lot of the same things that you do. Mostly in my case, it's
Working
a
on
it's
it
a,
and working on
a
it.
classic case of imposter syndrome in my case, but that's another conversation for another time as well.
And a form of and a lack of emotional intelligence, imposter syndrome. We have to remember that too, because we got to go back to that self-esteem. But also on X or Twitter at Dorina_Believe. I will be there too also.
Okay, great. And we will link to all of those on the show notes, as well as the blog post that will come out for this episode. All right, this is a fun question, one that you don't have to worry too much about talking about your own stuff, because I'm going to ask you about other people's stuff, is there a book or a film or a resource or anything at all? Actually, it could be yours too, but that's had an important influence on you, either personally or professionally, that you'd like to share with listeners?
Yeah, if there's one book, if you want to talk about emotional intelligence, again, they have a lot of books. Emotional Intelligence 2.0, Daniel Goleman's book. But like I said, with transformative emotional intelligence, it's transformative emotional intelligence for a positive career and life by Dr. Hammett and Dr. Lowe. Fantastic, fantastic stuff. It is a very, very good book that can transform you. The other book is Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. It is one of my all-time favorite books that has transformed my life on balance, as well as finding what I love and finding the ability of changing from happiness to joy in a society that just wants us just to have pleasure. And that is a wonderful book. As far as a movie is concerned, I think everybody should read the book Atonement. Do not tell anybody else about it. If you have read it, don't tell anybody about the end. It is one of the most beautiful book stories that you could just watch. It is just beautiful, but also from a teaching perspective, the first 45 minutes, the academic language of the 7 and 11-year-olds is so profound. I had to look up 16 words. And so when you see it from that perspective, which is good. And then also just really a fantastic book is called Breathe. I forgot James's name. It's James. I'll make sure I give you the
Okay.
information. But Breathe is another very powerful book as well. The final thing, I'm sorry, I said a final thing, but Adam Grant's work, anything Adam Grant does, he is absolutely fantastic. And there's one more that I just have to do. I'm sorry, I know that we have to go, and I
This
apologize.
always happens. You say you're going to give me two, and then you give me like seven
I give
because
you so many. Okay, here they are right here. Please, A Burst of Light by Audre Lorde. She's the guru of radical self-care from the 60s. It's beautiful poetry, but it's also good. So that is also a very powerful piece to diversify your thoughts on emotional intelligence and self-care.
amazing. Well, this is a good thing. Before I say it, I am going to leave this conversation with more questions than answers, and that's okay. And I think others are as well, and that's also okay. And we're not going to guarantee that we're going to answer all of your questions, but I will guarantee that if you're okay with it, Dorina, we'll come back and revisit this conversation, maybe get into a couple more specifics. But I really, really enjoyed this conversation. I hope listeners did too. I know it was a little on the long side, but that's okay. There's a lot to talk about. Excited to see you in person in about a month from now, and those of us who will be at the summit as well. And really, really appreciate you taking the time to do this and join us at the summit. It's a lot, so I appreciate you.
Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate the time. And for everybody, I hope you got something out of it, because that's all. And just please always remember to believe, be the educators who lead, to inspire and empower via empathy.